Something that I think is a huge impediment for many people in making the most of their time, which is what gets called imposter syndrome. The feeling that you don't know what you're doing, that you're a bit of a fraud, that everyone else around you in your industry or your community knows what they're doing far better than you do. And if any of that resonates with you, the message I'd like to communicate here is not that you're much, much better than you think and that you don't need to worry about being an imposter, but rather that everyone is an imposter. And the truth from experience and also from research that we see over and over again is that everyone is totally just winging it all the time. So all of this is just to say that I think, and my experience has been, that it's a big error when it comes to using your time well to wait, to put things off until such time that you feel like you really know what you're doing. In fact, you can certainly argue that there's something really beneficial about the fact that everyone is always winging it, about being honest with yourself, that you don't know exactly what you're doing. In the Zen Buddhist tradition, there's an idea called beginner's mind. And as a famous proverb in that tradition goes, in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few. The point is that actually, when you're really honest with yourself about how little you know, that makes you really receptive to learning. It makes you really receptive to taking advice, gleaning insights from other people, and as a result, doing original things.
Couple of tips for getting work done when you're not motivated. And the first one is to cut yourself some slack. The first one is to consider not doing the work, or at least switching to something that feels more appealing. Because if you sort of grind and you get into that situation where you're trying to force yourself to do something that you really don't want to do, it very often is counterproductive for the end result. If you really, really, really do have to do something that you really, really, really don't feel like doing, then I think the old advice is the best. Break it down into tiny chunks. Break it down and do an amount of time on it that seems almost ludicrous. Work on it for 1 minute. Set a timer. Stop when the minute's up. When the amount of time you're spending on a project gets sufficiently absurdly small, it's very difficult to feel too oppressed by it.
I want to talk about a metaphor that I think is really useful for clarifying and for finding some calm when you feel like you're really overburdened by items on your to-do list, or overburdened by information in your life that you feel you need to get through, or whatever it might be. And that's the metaphor that I call the menu principle. And I think the place to begin understanding the menu principle is to start with the idea of a to-read pile. I think many, many people have either literally a stack of books on their bedside table, or a whole lot of ebooks or audiobooks or podcasts, a backlog of things they keep meaning to get around to reading. If you treat a list as something you've got to get to the end of, well, you might get a little boost of happiness from ticking off a couple of items on that list. But the real goal is to get to the end of the list. The real implicit goal, even though it's a little bit absurd when you really think about it clearly, is that someday soon you're going to have nothing on your list. Well, it's not going to happen. And so you're constantly postponing the source of happiness into the future. If you treat a list as a menu instead, the pleasure, the gratification, the satisfaction comes from choosing to do one of those things right now. It's like a menu in a diner, in a restaurant. You're not trying to get to the point where you've eaten all the dishes. Rather, the joy and the satisfaction comes from the fact that there are all these things from which you could choose, and you make a considered, wise choice to pick a few of them, and you hopefully enjoy the doing of those things. So I think that metaphorical shift from lists, the way we usually think about them, to menus, things we get to pick from rather than things we have to get through, is a really powerful change to make in the way that you think about all those lists of things to do that tend to burden each of us. So in practical terms, first of all, this is just a matter of coming to see your own lists more as menus than as burdensome lists of things you have to get through. One tactic there is actually to deliberately include on a list fun things, things that you really relish the opportunity of doing. We tend instinctively, don't we, to put all the things on a to-do list that we kind of have to do and maybe wish we didn't have to do, and to leave all the things that we really, really want to do, the hobbies we want to pursue, or the social events we want to plan, or the just the relaxing activities we want to do. We tend not to include those on a list, because lists are for obligations and for duties. So I would recommend actually putting some of those fun things in the list as well. That will lend to it this quality of being a menu. And the really interesting thing about that is that you'll often find in that context that you will pick some of the more difficult, challenging things that need doing. You won't just find yourself doing the fun bits that you put on the list, because you will infuse the whole list with this spirit of being a menu. You'll actually realize that when you have the energy to do certain less than fun things, you'll choose to do them because you'd actually like them to have been done. There's a second list tactic that's somewhat related to what we've been discussing, which I always like to recommend, and that is the idea of keeping a done list. It's very, very easy in this mindset of lists as things we have to get through to focus entirely on the things that have yet to be done, and to, as a result, never feel like you're quite doing enough, never feel like you're quite on top of anything, because, of course, there will always be more things to do. A really good sort of intervention in this, psychologically speaking, is to, whatever else you do with your lists and how you think about them, keep a simple list in a notebook, in a text file, on a phone, whatever it is, of things that you have finished in the day, right? So each time you do something, you write it down. That list gets longer during the day, but it's a good thing that it gets longer, because that's evidence of all the things that you've done. I think keeping a done list can be a really good antidote to that problem that so many of us feel, that we wake up in the morning feeling like we're only going to be okay with ourselves, we're only going to feel good about ourselves if we get through a certain amount of tasks, a feeling of completeness that never actually arrives because there are always more tasks to do. Instead, you get to look at that done list and see all the things that you've done that you wouldn't have done if you'd just stayed in bed and never done anything. And there's a real sense then of satisfaction that you are taking items from the menu and doing them, and there they are, completed. Patience. It's not the kind of topic that people necessarily want to talk about. They have memories of being told by their parents to be more patient when they wanted things or wanted to go places as a kid. It's a kind of a unpleasant seeming kind of idea for many of us that we should be more patient. But in fact, as history has moved on, and in fact, as we've entered the modern world and everything is geared for speed, everything moves so quickly, patience actually becomes a form of power, because it's the power to resist the pace at which everything else and everybody else is moving, to be able to find that sort of quiet moment of reflection, and as a result, produce better work, find more enjoyment in life, solve problems more effectively. There was a psychologist called Robert Boyce who studied the habits of writers, specifically academic writers. And he reached this startling discovery that the most productive ones, as well, I think, as the happiest, the ones who are least tormented by what they did, they were the ones who made writing into quite a modest part of their daily lives. They would write for an hour, maybe just 10 minutes if they were struggling to get started, but no more than a couple of hours in the day, and then they would stop. And he realized not only that it was important to get started, everyone tells you that if you've got some creative ambition, it's really important to get started. But he pointed out it's also really important to stop. If you decide that you're going to do something for an hour, and then at the end of that hour, you're on a roll, you feel like you could go on forever, it's so tempting to say, well, let me do another hour. Why not? This inspiration is something that should be harnessed. He argued, no, actually, you should try to persuade yourself to stop, to walk away at that moment. If you've decided to do a certain amount and you get to that time, stop and go and do something else. Because what he noticed was that actually a big part of why we want to continue in those moments is a kind of impatience. It's a kind of desire to get to the end of the thing, to hurry the process faster than it wants to go. And what you find, it's almost magical, although I think it's got very mundane explanations. But what you find is that if you're willing to stop, to only go running or to work out for a smaller amount of time than you think you should be doing, to only write for 45 minutes when you feel that the pressure of the deadlines is such that you really ought to be doing it for 6 hours. If you can bring yourself to do that, you find that the next day you're really excited to get back to it and do it again. You find that being sustainable about it, doing it consistently over weeks and months becomes an awful lot easier because you haven't turned it into this huge, panicky, intimidating thing in your life. You've kept it at this really small level that makes it exciting and enticing to come back to. And the key to being able to do that is developing the patience to say at the end of that session of work or session of exercise, whatever it is, no, I'm nowhere near the end, but I'm going to stop anyway because I actually know that this is the way to get to the end most rapidly and effectively.